Great innovation stories make change possible. Each week on the Innovation Storytellers podcast, I invite innovation leaders to share how they overcame the obstacles to introduce breakthrough ideas to the world through the power of story. I'm featuring guests from Tesla, TD Ameritrade, Corning, Cisco, Bloomberg, and so many more. Listen in to learn how you can tell a more effective innovation story and change the future for the better. Hi, everybody. I'm Susan Linder. I'm your host here at Innovation Storytellers, back with another amazing episode. Today's discussion is going to function around all things digital transformation. We're taking a little hop across the pond from New York to London today because my guest, Chris Harris, is going to be talking to us about the wild, wonderful world of data, and specifically databases and how we are using data in innovation. And so Chris Harris, just so you know, is the Vice President and Global Field Engineering at Couchbase. He is a highly passionate global executive who is focused on delivering customer success and accelerating technology innovation and establishing an open, collaborative culture. Isn't that something we all want? He has led tech organizations in the area of NoSQL and big data and cloud. And he has also formed multiple pre-IPO companies into publicly traded companies like Hortonworks and Couchbase, and has had successful exits with SpringSource, which was acquired by VMware, and Hortonworks and its merger with Cloudera. So not only does he have a little MBA from Oxford and a master's in science and software engineering from that same wonderful institution, but he's also been in the field, certainly doing this heavy duty job of data and managing data and helping companies to figure out their data as they go through digital transformation. And that's why I really wanted to have Chris on the show today. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on Innovation Storytellers.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
I said NoSQL. Is that no SQL? Is that how I should be saying that?
You can technically use both, but a lot of people use NoSQL. Correct.
There you go. NoSQL, not another. Yeah. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I asked this question of all my guests when we first get started. How did you get into this crazy space of innovation? Most of us, and the desire to change what was the status quo. Most of us, none of us majored in innovation in university. So how did you come to work in this space?
I've always, even from a young child, if you want, I've always been into technology. Technology has been something in which I was almost brought up with in terms of even back in the day around gaming.
What was your game of choice as a kid?
Oh, I played Mario and the Mario Brothers with Nintendo. That's back in the day when that first got released.
I think I'm a little bit older than you because
the Atari before then, and then before that I was at the BBC with the green screens. If you want to go all the way back there, I remember the days when my school teacher used to roll in the BBC. And the BBC was a computer at the time, not the television.
Oh, not the television network.
No, it was a computer.
I never heard of it. That's so funny. We had Texas Instruments computers back in the day.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So fantastic. So you remember Pong and how Pong eventually like Space Invaders.
Yes, I remember that. And text games where you literally almost learned to read by playing these games, which is very different to where we are today.
Yeah. My son was a video game design major. So that's at the Rochester Institute of Technology, right? In those hallowed halls, video games. So I think we all got our start somehow.
We got stars somewhere.
Yeah.
And I can tell you back in the day, there was no like major in video gaming back then.
No.
But good for him. Sounds exciting. So yeah, I
can officially never kick him off the computer, by the way.
I'm sure.
I'm doing research, Mom.
That's my job, Mom.
Sorry, I interrupted you.
So yeah, I started off the whole technology passion started there, and then went into realizing that you can actually do this for a living, right? And got into computer science. One of the biggest things in which even today, I learned a lot from my undergraduate degree, but I still feel that there's still a lot of work to be done around educating people on the type of technology roles that are out there and the things that you can do. But that's a different topic. But yeah, I did computer science. After that, I was fortunate enough to get a role at a company that was really doing innovation in the payment industry. And we launched the chip and pin. So I think a few years ago, that was a big thing. Not so much these days.
Can you remind us what the chip and pin is? So for our younger innovators on the show.
Oh, come on. So your credit card has a little chip on it. Stick it in a machine and you have to put your PIN number in. That was innovation at the time, right? This whole contactless thing was futuristic. Dude,
I only have Apple Pay, so I don't know what you're talking about.
Yes. Before then, I had to sign somewhere recently, and I think the waitress didn't know what to do with that. So anyway.
You didn't get carbon paper all over your fingers?
So no, that's where I was lucky enough to get a role there and part of the engineering team actually after my computer science degree. Then went on to move roles into retail. And I'm talking a long time ago now, and helped some of the big retailers in the UK build e-commerce websites. And this is where things like Tesco came from. So
this was in the early 2000s.
Early 2000s before I. And then if you look at that market, actually, before I go into the next, friends of mine then went and founded a company around recruitment, which didn't go anywhere at the time. But this is always something to learn. That was all about trying to move the recruitment market online and online interviews, which today everybody does. But 25 years ago, it wasn't a done thing. And people were pretty nervous about trying to do online interviews. So that didn't work out, but that's okay. We all learn and we moved on from that. So, but there was this also underlying thing around the sort of technology we were using. And the technology was pretty much based upon open source technology, which is about having multiple companies work together to really drive innovation faster. And then I got a role at Red Hat and moved my career really away from being a back-end engineer to really into consulting and helping different companies all around Europe to look at how they build new applications. And Red Hat at the time was also moving themselves from let's say, an operating system company to beyond that into the middleware space. So had a great experience of not only helping some of the biggest companies around Europe new open source technology, but also work with inside a company to see how the transition of how the company grew and is growing into being an operating system company and learning new parts of technology that the staff weren't familiar with. And then that kind of then moved, and the middleware market moved with it to say, do we need a lot of this monolithical type architecture that Spring Source came from, and really looking at how do you look at the way people are building applications, changing the frameworks they were using. So that was a company that I joined, again, in the open source world. And eventually that got, I think you mentioned at the beginning, that got acquired by VMware and became, today, it's still a big part of that offering around their Cloud Foundry and their Spring Source stack. It's a big framework that they continue to leverage. But then what is that as you're building these new applications, what was happening is that the architecture of the underlying database was struggling because the databases were never designed for these major online systems. So you had these kind of what's still called today SQL databases, relational databases that are in the market. And it's an architectural problem, right? It's about there's nothing fundamentally, theoretically wrong with them. They were never designed for the scale and the requirements for the mass amount of data and the mass amount of high performance user requirements that are out there in the market today. That just was never a thought process for these original applications.
Can we just stop for a minute there? Because I think what you're saying is really important. And just before we hit the record button here, we were talking about the shift from what we think of as conventional IT and moving to digital transformation. And I think what people don't get about that process, because we could hang out in the weeds talking about databases, right? But that's what we're talking about is what are the tools and building blocks that allow us to innovate with greater ease? That ability to set a vision and achieve a vision requires a set of foundational tools that if we are not deploying the right architecture, our innovation will fail. So we can collect all the most brilliant data, but if we don't have a place to house it in the appropriate, right, in the appropriate storehouse and the way that allows us access to it, we're screwed. And so looking just at that moment in time, right? At that moment in time, from looking at legacy systems versus what we're talking about today, these kinds of databases, what are we inhibited from doing? What are we?
Well, that's interesting because what you're seeing is, I'll take a relational database, right? So what you're looking at is, how do I deal with the vast volume of requirements that are coming to me? So let me give you a real example. So traditional systems were designed for helping people, let's say, make a purchase. So I would go and potentially, if I was a retailer, I could start to track how many sales have I made, right? And then I could plot and say, this month I did X, next month I did Y, and I could look at historical kind of sales, and I could try to forecast what I was going to do in the future. And there's value in that. So very much so. But it doesn't tell me certain things. It doesn't tell me, why did somebody buy? So if you look at that and you go, if I was a user, what's driven me to that purchase? What did I click on? How did I engage with the company, the retailer, in order for me to make my purchasing decision? Now, if you think about that, the volume of data that you're collecting is vast. How many things do you click on compared to the amount of stuff that you actually purchase?
Right, because you're tracking the entire customer journey, right?
There's a vast difference.
The thought process of the consumer. You're not just tracking the behavior.
Exactly. And then you look at the behavior or the experiences that you see in the real engaging retail websites or websites in general. They're tailored to you. So
are we talking about Amazon? Are we talking about?
You have your own recommendations. They come to you directly, right?
Netflix, if I'm trying to choose what I'm going to watch.
Adverts, right, come to you, right? You see this tailoring happen. Now you think, how, not only the vast amount of data that I have to collect to make that work, but how fast do I have to process this data? I have to do it with inside your interaction, and I have to make a decision before you see the page.
Oof.
Right.
It's like the page is doing the thinking while the customer is doing the thinking.
And it has to be thinking faster than the customer has to.
For me, that's not so hard, but in general,
yes.
Yeah.
Right. It has to make these decisions really fast.
How many of us are thinking about our web pages as thinking for us, as being an active, sentient kind of page while we're clicking away through our customer journey? Do I want the lime green dress or the cherry red dress or the, chocolate brown dress? Everything for me is food, by the way. But as we think about those decisions, we're asking our data to come alive in the midst of the customer journey.
That is absolutely true. But you also look at the other dynamic, right? You're looking at it and you describe it as the web page.
Like a book.
It's technically not the page. So now, without going into all the technical weeds of this, you think of actually what's happening is that you're talking to a server somewhere, right? The web page is making a remote request to something. Now, think of all the interactions that now have to happen. That message has to go across your internet, across the network, make it go and talk to the system. That system is unlikely to be working in isolation as multiple systems engage now, right? And then there's decisions that have to happen all of the time. So for the extent that Couchbase, as an example here, is looking at like the quality of the network. Forget just the retail experience, but as the network from a telco perspective, if it's realizing that there's about to be some outage somewhere or the quality is dropping somewhere, I have to instantly reroute that traffic. And then I have to go into a server, and that server may, for whatever, have a difficulty for multiple different reasons. Power outage is a simple example, but there could be a vast amount of other complexities that go into that.
Sure.
And it has to make a decision to reroute that to another server, make a decision about what food you like, send it back to you without you noticing.
So you have a whole hand of God reaching in.
There's a lot going on.
We're talking about traffic cop. We're talking about salesperson offering you new things to take a look at and recommend. We're talking about security and making sure that there's a guy standing at the door on this web page. If we're calling that, it's almost like you're summoning the matrix to come down each time I decide to click.
So there's a lot of interactions happening, and these decisions have to happen literally instantly. So when I talk to clients about their people say, "Oh, my day's got to be fast." Okay, define fast to me. I'm talking about
faster than instant.
Right, nanosecond response time. You're talking like pretty fast
and predictive, right? And it's not even just that predictive. It's the speed; it's predictive just by the sheer act of me summoning a URL. The internet already knows so much about me before I even land on Amazon.com.
And the retailers know. It's roughly, and it's gone down over the years, but people used to use the saying, you have 3 seconds. You have a lot less than 3 seconds now. Because if I go on a web page, I'm sure you do it, and I click and it doesn't respond, I just go somewhere else. I'm done. I'm
faster
out.
Than a real housewife turning over a table.
I'm done.
Better be there.
So there's a huge ecosystem, right? And this is no. I've been talking about the speed that you need to get data to people, but then how fast does your application need to make a decision? You've got to get all these moving parts in this ecosystem moving. So when we help with clients around performance tuning, and we're literally looking at every possible element of the stack that you could possibly think about, how you get the fine-grained performance out of it.
So I'm hearing the heart of a CIO, of a chief information officer, not our typical chief innovation officer, but our CIO pounding with excitement and abject terror of the rip and replace that might need to go on, number one.
Sure.
And number two, the budget discussion that CIO has to have with their CEO and the board to go, oh, by the way, here's the Mongo price tag that we're going to need in order to cover in order to get us to that level of efficacy.
And then you have the innovation team. I want to build a new website. I want to build a new user experience. It's going to generate all this revenue. And these teams have to work together, right? Because people have made mass investments in skills, right? For their staff. They've made massive investments for their existing architecture. They have existing vendor relationships. There's a lot of the ecosystem that comes together. You don't just buy this thing in a box and you're done. It's quite a lot of technology involved with it.
And integration. So take us through, if you wouldn't mind, Chris, so choose company X, customer X of yours that you've helped with this kind of transition from legacy system. And by legacy, we could be talking 3 years old, right? I mean, the internet time is like this. So talk to us a little bit about a customer example, and you can share the name or not. I would love it if you would tell us whatever industry you might be referencing, just so we can have a point of understanding. And if you can mention the client name, great. But take us through what that transformation looks like, and maybe even some of the bumps and hurdles along the way, because nothing happens in innovation without some degree of agony, because we're asking humans 100%. To change. So don't forget to leave out the good stuff where we can pick up the popcorn and then keep eating some popcorn along with.
If you look at, I'll use an example that we have, and I'll use you can go to Couchbase Connect, and you see a lot of our customers talk about their use cases they go through. But let's take the airline as a classic example. People talk about airlines being a pretty old industry. So what sort of innovation are you driving here?
115 years since those two bicycle repairmen launched that plane into the sky. 115, and now we have private space travel, right?
It's a different world today, right?
Yeah, it moves quickly. Not very long a span of time, but go ahead. Sorry.
That's all right. But if you look at that and you go, okay, I'll try to use an example that people can relate to. So we've all been on planes. Okay, most of us, a few years ago, I would have said we've all been on planes. Maybe we haven't all these days with us being at home. Let's go with the idea that most people have been on planes. And what they've seen is there's sheer vast amount of staff that it requires to get a plane off the ground. Every single flight, you'll see it.
You mean the humans required to move the plane to the sky? Yeah.
The humans that required this to happen. You can see, obviously, from a customer perspective, there's the whole check-in process. There's the whole, even when you get on a plane, literally physically get on, you'll start to see these people walk around with checking security, checking all of the maintenance crew that came on. And then there's the cabin crew, and then there's the pilots. And there's paper, literally, that they're trying to pass to each other to agree that we're ready to go. We've been working with some of the airline to say, okay, how do we do innovation here? How do we improve this whole flow so that we can get planes off the ground a lot faster?
Mm-hmm.
And also, how do we improve the overall customer experience as we do that? So, a number of challenges that come into play here, which is a plane isn't a static thing, right? It moves. And it moves where not only is it moving where there's network, it's moving where there's no network at all. It's in the air. So how do you not only have applications where the ground crew can communicate to each other, but also you can have cabin crew walk around during a flight and have the application still work, and whilst you're in a flight, and then communicate back to the ground when they reach a place where there's a network again. Be that for maintenance, be that for customer complaints, be that for how do you bring all that together so that as an airline, I can see a complete 360 view of what's happening in my world.
Right. That's
a pretty complex problem to try to solve. We, Couchbase, then go, there's a need therefore to have the applications work where there's not even a connection anymore, completely remotely. We've all seen applications where you've got a mobile phone, you press a button and it stops responding to you. And that's because it can't connect to anything. So how do you get the database or the interaction to work in the middle of the air? So now we've got innovation and technology that allows people to do that, but then also connect it back up so that when it does come back online, somebody in their office can understand all the maintenance, all of the customer feedback, all of the interactions together in one page, one browser, if you like, and can complete the view of what's happening, not just on one flight, but in all the flights that they're doing. So that's the sort of projects that we've been working on with our clients, which allow them to have remote mobile data applications with also having the decision-making and the interactions of all their data to back in the main data center. Now, that introduces a fair amount of innovation challenges from a people perspective. And you look at that and you go, if I'm going to introduce new technology, how do I do that in the right way? Tech people can get caught up in the, let's say, the sophistication of their own technology, right? In terms of the building new features and functions and trying to show all these good capabilities. What a lot of people forget is the skill set of the existing team, right? How do I build a technology that is familiar to people so that they can leverage their skill set? Because as an individual engineer or somebody responsible for implementing this new innovation, I don't want to be left out in the cold. Mm-hmm. I don't want to be the one that's out of a job now because I don't have skills in this new technology. That's not good for the individual, but it's also not good for the company. Because then how do I find staff? How do I find staff that has skills in this new technology that you want to deploy here? We have to leverage the interface, the way that the people are developing applications so they can leverage that skill set. And this is a big problem in the database industry as it is. And I'll use you an example here to try to explain. We, with the world, and I have one, talking about electric cars. Electric car is a great innovation for a number of different reasons. Good for the environment, more efficient. We all know the value of an electric car. But what is it? A really high level. It's an architectural change. The engine is changed. Okay, I agree with that. Ecosystems will change too. But how I drive is the same. I have a steering wheel. I have pedals. I can drive my electric car without having to relearn how to drive.
It's a Prius, not a rocket ship.
Exactly, right?
Yeah,
that's good. So what the database industry happened in the database industry a few years ago, about 10 years ago, we saw this pain in the architecture of the traditional relational databases. And what happened was, and it happens in every industry, there was fragmentation. Okay, I agree. Your database architecture is broken. Let's all make new ones. Right? So what happens is that now out there in the world, 10 years ago, you have a document database, you have a caching database, you have an analytics database, you have a search database, you have all these databases. Right?
Sure.
Pick a database of whatever's good for your application, right? Now you have the challenge, and this is what the company I was referring to was having. Hold on now. They're all good. They do a good job of what they do, their niche thing that they do. But now I have to have different skills and different for every single one of these databases. I can't just go find one person that knows this, all of them. It doesn't work like that. So then you have this pressure point to say, yes, I want to drive this sort of innovation out there in terms of changing the airline experience. Where do I find these people? Now, if you look at that, and it's an interesting flow in markets in general, what you'll see is then the market go, it's not about having different types of databases in my example here. It's about capabilities for the user. So I'll use another analogy. Take many years ago, a mobile phone did a very simple thing that many young people struggle with today. It actually made phone calls, right? That's a new idea that phones actually make phone calls. Right? You can actually call people.
Wait, where do I put the quarter? Where's the coin go exactly?
That's the only thing it did. But you got your iPhone there. You got, it's a camera now. You can do your email.
Is my least used application is the phone. I'm curious when we're going to stop calling it a phone.
Exactly. It's not a phone anymore.
This is the same experience I had with my son. We were cleaning at our house to move. And I pulled into the back of a cabinet and I found this box of floppy disks that I had saved my thesis on. And there it was. And I held it up and I said to my son, I was like, my thesis is here. And he goes, what? And I go, yeah. And he goes, why did you 3D print a copy of the save icon?
There you go.
I was like, that's right, Michael. That's what I did. I 3D printed a copy of the save icon because I just wanted one for myself as a keepsake.
That's what you did.
Like the circuitous nature of going, actually, this is where we saved stuff, not that's an icon that has no relevance to my life from an iconography standpoint, right? And you just look at the symbols that gird our life. Our kids don't even know what that symbol means.
Right. They don't know anymore.
No,
my children
icon. They don't know where it's from.
But my children struggle with the idea that we used to have broadcast TV. They're like, no, you can pick whatever you want. What's this like? You only had a certain choice of what was on TV at any given time.
You're like, Dad, that's a really dumb idea, Dad. Why would you do it that way?
Where I was going was that if you look at the database market, then you go, why can't we build a database almost like a phone, in my example, where it's not about having all of these different kind of types of databases. It's like saying I want a camera, and yes, is there a market for niche camera suppliers that I could probably go and find one today? Yeah, some people make a living out of that, but most people on vacation now they just take their phone, which is much more convenient. So how do we take a database technology and say it's not about having different types of databases? It's about bringing these capabilities back together into one system where I can re-leverage all the skills that I already have. So it's not about NoSQL versus SQL, or it's about being able to say, what skills do you have? If you have SQL skills, that's great. If you have document skills, that's great. If you have caching skills, that's great. If you can use them all on one system, just like you can use multiple applications on your mobile phone and leverage your data. So that is a very different way of thinking about these data platforms. And also it takes away a lot of the stress that many people have when you start to introduce innovation, because you're like, oh, you're telling me I can bring in this new technology without either having to completely reskill all my staff, and the staff go, oh, wow, I can pick this up when some other new employee is not going to come and take my job. And that's getting them on board is important.
So I just think like the whole human component of innovation, oftentimes we talk about it, oh, it's politics that's getting in the way. It's people who are reticent to change. But the example that you gave of how many humans does it take to get a flight in the air, and recognizing that so often our own Achilles heel is the fact of being human. We have to learn all the stuff that brilliant minds like yours create. And if they don't interact with each other, and if we don't build technologies that are fluid and flexible, then we fail to execute and to implement, because this learning curve or the time pressure or the distraction from the rest of our day-to-day is so great. And the other analogy that you gave is all of these apps that we have on our phone are so incredibly fantastic, but they are useless without a device to use them on. So inherently, we build on that App Store platform in order to distribute our fantastic apps. So if they don't play nice together, right? I think one of the greatest inventions of this century is, and they certainly existed in the 20th century, though, is the amazingness that is an API. Sure. Like the interconnected tech bridge that allows us to put our arms around the whole enterprise, because we certainly wouldn't be able to do it before. And it's that thing that gives us the sprinkles and the cherry and the on top. I always want to know, in that tech stack, great, that's the layer cake. What are we putting on top of that? And again, my food analogies are way too vast for this, but anyway, I just rail against all sports related analogies. I will not do it.
Okay. That's okay. I can do food.
but it's because it's those pieces that actually make the customer experience unique. It's those extra pieces, the ability to serve that data in a unique and surprising way that makes the customer connect and say, you know what, I didn't think of getting that shoes and that purse with that dress, but since you've served it to me so beautifully and so elegantly and in a way that's really connects with me because you get me, that's the icing on the cake. That is the thing that makes us go, wow, suddenly all of those databases firing on all sixes at the same time allows us to innovate the customer experience in a way that we never thought possible.
That's why I talk a lot about empathy. I just talked about looking at the engineers and the skills that they have and understanding what's driving that behavior in terms of maybe there is people pushing back on you. But then you've got to look at the other way around as well. You start looking at the customers. If I was in the customer's shoes, what do I care about? Right? And they're not necessarily, they're actually very different to the engineer that's building the application is worried about his job, his or her job, to trying to get into the mindset of the user. If I'm the customer on a retail website, or what do I care about? Because it's easy to throw things at them, but how do I tailor that into a personal experience? How do I build that loyalty? And that goes back into some of the conversations we were having about really knowing the customer. And I talked briefly about knowing why they buy, but people also forget you can use data to understand if they're satisfied. The more and more we go online, I get to more I understand about how you're using the product. Now, because the product is itself online. So even with our online database today, we get the ability to quickly understand if somebody's having an issue. Right? Because it's hosted in the cloud. Our team is able to get immediately alerted. Expertise can roll into it very quickly, or they can see that people are taking a path. So gaming industries do this all the time that we work with, right? They're monitoring games. Somebody's purchased a game, they're monitoring the game for not only how many users do I have, that's a classic one, right? That's a usual database thing. Is anybody cheating? Are they playing the game the way in which I thought they should be playing? Are they going down the storyline, or somebody found some way of interacting that is destroying my game? Or how do I find lessons about how they're communicating, especially with massive online games? And you can start then to build and improve based upon the interactions of your product. So talk about A/B testing, right? They can test different things. Classic use of data. But you can do that post-purchase rather than just a marketing tool for you as a marketer.
It's funny because we're on the heels this week, right? Biggest acquisition in Microsoft's history of Microsoft purchases Activision Blizzard. Right? In the billions and billions. I'm sure those guys were sitting in sweatpants playing those same Atari games you and me were. Actually, they're way younger. They're on some Xbox, whatever. Fine. So, but thinking about what is it going to be like? I'm envisioning like the Microsoft guys with a knife and fork going, oh, let me get my hands on that. And thinking about, wow, how do we integrate these systems? How do we suddenly integrate these systems? One of the biggest gaming companies in the world, purchased by arguably the biggest software company in the world. Now what? And I can't even imagine the task ahead of them to bring those into the house, right? Into the fold.
Well, I know they've also got information, and I'm not saying this in a negative way, just to look at the whole portfolio. You've also got LinkedIn in that ecosystem. You've got GitHub, which is a big developer community that's in there. So, and you got the cloud infrastructure, right? So, which is another completely different dynamic that's out there. So, as we've seen with much of our clients, as they've embraced cloud, a lot of people say, okay, what's the advantage of cloud computing? There's the economics of it. I get it. But if you're as a product, an innovation perspective, the days of, you probably remember as well, people go into a store and buying discs. Well, that's way gone. Right? I don't do that anymore.
I still have a floppy disk. Yeah, I have a couple of CDs and DVDs laying around.
I got that around. Right.
There's some mixes I just can't get rid of. I have to hold on to these things. I don't know what for. I have nothing to play them on, but I can't throw them away.
But we also then went to still very popular today. People download technology and they stick it in their data centers. Okay, fine. And then as a software vendor, you think about this for a moment. Now I have people out there with, and it's just not just us, it's just software in general. You have out there with all these different versions of your technology, right? Because somebody bought it last year, somebody bought it last week, somebody bought it 3 years ago, somebody bought it 5 years ago, and they're trying to keep the technology up to date. They do upgrades, and as a company now, if we want to roll out a new capability to the on-premise world, that's quite a hefty task to do, right? Because now you're highly dependent on your end customer having not only the desire to want to go to your new version, but to have the bandwidth to put it into their project plan, to disrupt whatever they're doing because they want to get to this new version. There's got to be a compelling reason that the innovation is driving for me to want to leverage these new features. So that's, as a software vendor, going, okay, now I've got a lot of people, a lot of different versions. That's challenging.
Wait, so let me ask you. So this is a podcast about storytelling for innovators. So what is the story that you tell in order for people to get out of the funk of the status quo and say, we're making a shift? What's the story from you working in huge swaths of data across so many different divisions? You really are a silo breaker when you're taking all these different databases. And maybe people don't feel it because it's on the back end. I'm sure the IT teams do. What is the story that you tell, Chris, in order to people to pry the Lotus notes out of their cold, dead hands?
It depends on who you're talking, where they sit in the organization, because I think you can broad brush it and say, I do X, Y, Z all the time. But I think you've really got to understand who you're talking to.
So first, know your audience. Okay.
First, and then let's make it something that people can rally behind.
How do you do that?
Right. And I got caught many years ago now. If you start to look at, we're just talking about, I just built this new algorithm. I've just got this new feature. Isn't it great? Yeah, maybe. Not really. Okay, now, if I said this is part of project, I'll make it up, Sky, right? Well, no, what, you have a project? It has my feature in, but yeah, I have a project, right? And by the way, my project has a name.
Right. Like a Bond film. That's right. It's Project Sky. Shh. Don't tell anybody.
And then you go into like, how do you like, articulate the benefits of this project you just created? And then how do you show progress really fast? You take an idea and be able to say, in our next meeting, we'll make this progress. Something small. It doesn't really matter. It's just some progress that you can articulate that the project is moving forward with you. And then bringing people into that with you and going, well, you've got some great ideas. You've got some skill set that we can leverage. We saw this with the launch of our cloud product, right? So we launched a cloud product, which is now a hosted product. Traditionally, people would run databases on-premise. Right. You run it in the cloud, brand new product. We're launching it out. Very popular these days in terms of our product, but cloud and databases are popular. Sure. But now you look at it and you go, this idea that I can add a new capability really quickly is something that gets people into the project. So now I can start saying, I've got a new project, in our case here, it was called Capella, that not only am I going to say, yeah, it's a nice theory, look at my beautiful PowerPoint, come along, we'll get something delivered in a year. I can literally have monthly milestones that we're dropping. So then you can start to bring people into the journey and they go, hold on, I can bring my skill set. I can see my impact immediately. And if people can start to see the team that's building the product, the innovation team start to see their vision come to life, and they can actually feel they're having an impact either on the company or on their own personal satisfaction or on the customer, you'll get more people bought in.
Yeah.
So to me, it's about having that a centralized thing that people are focused on. I'll say you call it a name. We use a lot of a framework where we identify a popular framework out there called the DAISY framework, decision-making framework. But the clear part of it is I want collaboration. 100%. I want people to feel part of this new project, this new innovation that we're driving. But I also know who the driver is. I also know who gets up every morning and goes, this is the thing I think about getting out to the door, or the next phase of my project. I'm not going to get distracted. This is my wake up morning thought process. I'm sure you have it for podcasts, right?
I have it for coffee.
This is what I own.
And I have it for podcasts.
Then I do my thing.
In that parody.
You need that part, right? If you don't have that driver, then you're just going to have a load of ideas and no one making a decision. And then you can get into either a lot of discussions and no progress, or an echo of just everyone agreeing with each other, which you have to also be cautious of.
On this show, we talk about this 5-step process around innovation storytelling, which is first, get people on board and seeing eye to eye with their mutual history. So I'm the innovator, I'm bringing something new, and I'm talking with someone who's working in current status quo, which isn't to say isn't innovative in its own right. It's just where we are in this moment in time. So what do we share as innovator and worker about what's happening right now? And can we see eye to eye and understand the vision that is existent right now? And what do we have in common around that? Our next phase, step 2, is understanding our core values. What are the values that are currently driving our success right now? And the values that will need the new ones to move us forward. So is there something new about those values that has to shift? So I often use the example of the prophets going from an eye for an eye to turn the other cheek. What is the shift that needs to happen that says we're going to maintain some of those values that got us here, but we now need new ones that will allow us to take us to a higher level, or a different level rather?
What I find about values is an interesting discussion, because it's a very simple word, but then people get lost in the word.
They sure do.
Because what I find is that some people, when you talk to values, I go down the fact of, are you talking about the traditional value drivers? Are you talking about increasing revenue? Are you talking reducing cost? Are you talking?
Oh no, I'm talking about the ones in here. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a different mindset, but then other people go, oh, but the value is that it may go faster. No, that's different perspectives. So really I find clarifying the values is a massive piece of work that needs to be done, because people use these words without really understanding them.
And then that next is, what's the message? So every innovation project to some degree needs a rallying cry. It needs something that everyone can understand and frankly feel within themselves. So that shift of an eye for an eye to turn the other cheek is a rallying cry, right? It says that I'm going to behave differently. I'm going to think about things differently. I'm going to walk in the world differently. And that message means I'm leaving some things behind. Will you come with me? And so that collaborative effort says, how do I get people around that new message, that new way of thinking that will drive the Sky project? And it's not a giant departure from where we were. It's just taking one step into an unknown future. That's really important, because getting people to walk into something unknown means if I'm the innovator, I'm required to paint a picture of the future that my counterpart, my collaborator can't see yet. That's my job as the driver of that project. And so then my next task is finding my 12 apostles, right? Finding that gang who's going to follow me and say, I believe what you believe. I can see that future. I can visualize it. And it doesn't matter if it's heaven, if it's 52 virgins, if it's an endless reel of reincarnation over and over again. I can see it. I get it. I'm willing to step into the unknown with you. And who are those early adopters? And they might be your biggest skeptics. And those are the best ones, by the way. And then finally, the last phase of that innovation storytelling process is viral language. How do I get other people to experience the vision and the future? And now they want to tell other people, so that we get all of that collaboration on board organically, as opposed to from the top down forcing it on people. Because when people can feel like, wow, that shift in a database is going to allow us to do XYZ for a customer, now they tell two friends and so on. But we have to give them the language that allows them to share their own story.
I'm sure you've experienced it, and I find it extremely satisfying when you're driving some innovation that you've been driving for potentially for quite some time as a group of people, and you've got your messaging right, you've got your strategy in the right way, you're starting to execute, and then you're at the water cooler, and then this person who's not part of the project team at all is like completely distant from it, walks up to you and starts to say, "Did you know about this project?" "No." And you get them to explain it to you. Right? And that's, it's extremely satisfying if somebody can replay your message back to you in the way in which you've been trying to articulate it for quite some time. You've made a lot of progress.
That is the best day of my life every time it happens, when I'm talking with the client and they're like, "I heard someone talking about it in the cafeteria. I heard it mentioned in the all hands meeting. I heard someone mention it at the Agile stand up on Monday morning." And like, they used my words. And I was like,
"You use my words." Correct.
Yeah.
We got a project, we got a Capella as a product out there. It was a product we launched last year. Obviously, it took time to pick the name and everything else, but now people use it as second nature, right? And you're like, see, that it does work. Giving things the right structure allows people to rally around it.
Absolutely. All right, Chris, we are coming up on the tail end of our podcast, and I want you to know I put all of my guests on the hot seat to ask them some very...
I thought I was already on the hot seat. Yeah.
Very easy questions about innovation. So here's question one. In the history of time, if you could have joined any innovation team, which team would you have joined? Mm-hmm.
See, I would have gone, just knowing where it's ended up, with Tim Berners-Lee and the whole work they were doing in the early stages of the web. Would have been fascinating to be like almost a fly on the wall, and because I bet they would never imagined how it is, how
so
it's
are you at
to.
DARPA or are you at Internet 1.0? Where
well, you remember
the military? Where are you?
Yeah, but remember this is the whole thing, right? It started off in the military.
Which part of that compendium do you want to be in? Do you want to be on the commercialized side, or do you want to be in?
I probably just on that gap where it just became a little commercialized, and just seeing that growth would have been, just seeing it come alive like that must have been extraordinarily exciting.
It'd be fascinating. Okay, so the question number one. Question two is, what innovation makes you most happy? What is the innovation that you love and admire most? And I often share with people, my 93-year-old mom, her favorite innovation is those dishwasher pods. I was like,
I see what you're going with that.
You've been on the planet 94 years. That's your favorite thing is dishwasher pods. She goes, yeah, there's nothing better. Nothing better has happened in my lifetime than that. I was like, how about the dishwasher?
The dishwasher itself, not the pod.
Like, nah, the pod.
I still have this huge respect for the car itself. And not because of the reason that people think it makes my transport easier, because sure, it does. It's much more about the history of the fact that people had horses, right? And then, there's not just, it was inconvenient that I had a horse, but the streets weren't particularly clean because of the horses. And then the whole ecosystem and to get a car to work has to be rethought. And even today, as we talked about, I still use a car as an analogy on having that ability to change architecture, but also make it familiar to people. So I just find that whole history. And then you start talking about how the car industry itself was centralized. And now, many of the cities that were massively into driving the car industry have almost collapsed on themselves, although the car industry hasn't. So, you start going on that path. It's just a really fascinating world.
And the supply chain that has that's buttoned up around it. Fascinating. Okay. If you could invent anything, what irks you in the course of your day that doesn't exist that you wished existed? If you could invent anything, what would it be?
A way of changing my car battery.
Like, I love the car. I hate the battery.
I hate that battery. So I could have a spare battery that I could just plug in. Could I just do that?
I'm sure it's weeks away at this point, Chris, right? That's just
somebody's got to have thought about that by now.
Fantastic. Chris Harris, thank you so much for joining me on Innovation Storytellers. This is good. This was a lot of fun. And I was nervous about just talking about databases, but there's really something so phenomenal about understanding how it underpins the architecture of how we live and breathe. And your revelation for me about seeing every web page as like a living, breathing entity that's talking to me.
Massive ecosystem there.
And combining all this ecosystem of data behind me. I'm a little creeped out, frankly, going shopping on Amazon after this, but they're watching you. But we knew that already. But
we knew that already. That isn't news.
So, Chris, if people want to get in touch with you, how can they find you?
You can obviously go to our website in terms of couchbase.com, and you can find out more information about the company in general. But if you want to contact me, I'm on LinkedIn. You'll find me at Chris Harris. Do Chris Harris at Couchbase, not just Chris Harris. In the UK, because you'll probably find a racing driver, and don't ask them about databases. That's not going to work so well. So look for Chris Harris at Couchbase, and you'll find me more than happy to chat to anybody.
Thank you so much, Chris.
Thank you.
Now you might be asking, Susan, why innovation storytelling? Well, the truth is that an innovation story told well not only breaks down communication barriers so you can drive change and new growth, but it also helps other people remember and champion your work. And it propels your best ideas forward faster to secure you the runway, resources, and recognition you so richly deserve. In other words, stories are memory-making devices that significantly reduce the time it takes for you and your innovation to be understood. But like many leaders, you probably never got the memo that storytelling skills would be central to your success. Well, I've got some good news for you. It's not too late, because I've got you covered. Whether you need an expert to come and speak to your innovation leaders, you need training in the art and method of innovation storytelling, or you just need the support and guidance of a consultant who can get you where you want to go in less time, visit www.susanlinder.com today to learn more and to set up a call to discuss your needs. I'm so looking forward to connecting with you and to helping you tell a great innovation story. If you liked what you heard so far, don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another episode, and leave us a comment. Tell us what you think of this episode. We'd love to hear from you. And if you didn't like what you've heard, just forget everything I've said.